Today, Michael is appropriately going to be talking about vinegar, and we will be sampling some vinegars generously provided by Jitti. He is a local Boston chef with a huge passion for food and a greater passion for fermentation. Jitti is an avid forager and is doing some pop-up dinners called Spring, Summer, and Fall, which uses all locally foraged ingredients.
And all handmade, all fermented food as well. So check it out.
All right. Without any further ado,
Thank you.
Michael.
Thank you, everybody, and thank you for those giggles about the title. It was one of those things that was a placeholder. I don't know if I ever expected it to be the name of the book, but once I started traveling through the world, people got the joke. It translated into French, Italian, German, and Japanese, so then we luckily got to keep that title. And I think it's also drawing in a community of people that wouldn't care about fermentation or vinegar otherwise. And that's kind of the point, you know. As a photographer, I've got to experience lots of kitchens. I actually started my career both in cooking and photography here in Boston, and I had both hats on. I had the toque, and actually I didn't wear a hat as a photographer. It gets in the way, that brim. But trying to figure out what I was doing, it was this amazing amalgamation of two things. Cooking and only having the time to do my work while I was cooking. So I happened to be at B-Side Lounge, which is now Lord Hobo in Inman Square, and I would bring my camera in, trying to figure out what my assignment should be. It initially wasn't really an assignment. It was more for me that I was taking photos of my prep work and my plating, almost making like a manual, so I could kind of prep myself on what to do in the kitchen. And I would tack these things up on a big Homosolt wall in my apartment. Someone came over one time and said, "Oh, that's a very cool photo project." I'm like, "Yeah, it is." That turned into a 3.5-year documentary here in Boston where I got to go into kitchens like Number 9 Park with Barbara Lynch, Clio with Ken Oringer, and was only supposed to be about a semester long. Again, extended itself into years because what I found in those kitchens wasn't just a photographic opportunity, but this amazing world of culinary delights. In that, I think I was about 20 or 21, standing at the pass with Barbara Lynch during a busy service at Number 9 Park, camera in hand. I had my feet up against the wall. I remember my ankles must have been so strong because I was constantly going like this, trying to photograph down over the pass. And she just hands me this little capful of something and says, "Take it." And when Barbara says, "Take it," just take it. I do a little shot. I said, "What is that?" She's like, "It's the best vinegar you're ever going to taste." It gives me the rest of the bottle and says, "Don't fuck it up." I took that home, trying to figure out what just happened. My palate, my life was changed forever, really. You can read a bit about it in Astrip, but I don't want to go too far into it, but I don't even know what happened. That first taste of anything that completely transforms the way you eat, the way you taste, that was that. I had never had acidity like that before. Not to say that I didn't grow up tasting vinegar or tasting, ripe tomatoes or orange juice, but I had never tasted acidity like that. 15 years later, I found myself in Vienna. There's this vinegar maker named Erwin Gegenbauer, who I think is quite possibly the best vinegar maker in the world. No offense to Jitti. It's just, when you have somebody sample you on something so transformative, that is your canon. That is where you want to figure out how to get to, both as a vinegar maker, but just as a way to kind of close that cycle. And I got to do that. I mean, this book is such a ruse. The fact that some publisher, gave me enough time and money to travel around the world to study how to make vinegar, how to cook with vinegar. I mean, I couldn't be more tickled about that, and I couldn't be happier that that's the way I learned how to make vinegar, because prior to that, my only experiences were as a photographer. Photography is a funny thing. Analog photography is rare these days, but when there was silver gelatin prints, you had to go through a developer and a stop bath, etc., to actually create a negative. So when you develop something, that was alkaline. When you stop something, that was acetic acid. So I would reek of vinegar coming out of those, coming out of the dark rooms. And that also kind of stuck in my head, that smell, that essence, and it was off-putting. It was not anything I wanted to be around. Halfway through my college career, digital photography was introduced. So I was that last kind of bastion of analog to digital. And I went the digital route because I didn't want to stink like vinegar all the time. Again, 15 years later, I'm the guy on the New York City subway that people don't want to sit next to. It's because I've been racking barrels and I smell like vinegar. Thankfully, not piss and vinegar, but certainly vinegar. But there was this thing called vinegar syndrome, and acetic acid can actually create really, really bad negatives if it's in the wrong environment. If you didn't get into the stop bath fast enough, or there was way too much acetic acid beneath the cellulose, which was the top of the film, it would kind of dry and crack and become very brittle. It's also another weird thing that this many years later, I'm dealing with cellulose again. At the top of the barrel, that mother that floats there. So, I had these ideas of vinegar throughout my life, which weren't really vinegar as I know it today. So my path was, circuitous. I wasn't really aiming to be in Vienna and meet this guy Gegenbauer. I wasn't really aiming to be a vinegar maker. Just a lot of things kind of fell into place. I live in Brooklyn, New York now, and for years, working as a photographer, I helped start edible magazines, worked for Eater. I am a host on Heritage Radio Network. I do all these things in the food world, but I missed cooking. And I was trying to figure out how can I get back in there without actually being on the line. And the artisan food movement is a wonderful way to do so. And I thought, well, I don't really have that much time. What fits into my schedule? And by process of elimination, I'm like, well, vinegar is this fantastic thing because if I fuck anything up, maybe it will become vinegar. So it's a good end stop.
That's what happened.
Exactly.
when people travel.
Yeah, and so the first time I ever actually made vinegar was by accident, in the same way that I believe most of you think vinegar is made. I was trying to make a small beer, or actually, even before that, I had a whole bunch of beer left over from a party. And I put it in the barrel because I thought I was into the whole barrel-aged cocktail movement, but I didn't really know how to mix a cocktail. I'm like, I'll put the rest of the keg in this barrel. Saturday after Thanksgiving, and then I forgot about it. That next spring, I opened up that barrel, and it was just this waft of acetic acid. I said, what the heck happened here? I opened it up, I tasted it. I'm like, oh my God, that is the best beer vinegar I've ever tasted in my life. How can I do that again? And the way my mind works is if I don't know how to do it, I got to figure out how to do it. I spent the next 3 years kind of collecting journals, empirical data, researching what had happened there, and I found very little literature. I went to restaurants and asked chefs, and not many of them make vinegar in-house. Very, very few, and Jitti can speak to that because he travels around the country, if not world, teaching people how to, kind of attain that status. It's a very easy thing to do, but it takes a couple variables and controls, and I think that's what we're going to talk about today. Because I want to start about, where we are right now here in Boston in the New England food shed. Because there's a chart in my book at the end, and I don't have to flip it because it's the most rudimentary chart you'll ever see. And there's 4 parts. Starts at starch, and moves to sugar, and moves to alcohol, and ends at vinegar or acetic acid. So anything that is starch, that can convert into sugar, that can convert into alcohol, can eventually become acetic acid. So go out in the market and look for things that are starches and sugars and alcohols.
Pasta water. He told me actually 3 weeks ago, a month ago. He said, hey, have you ever made pasta water vinegar? I said, I did. I boil potato and I may use that to make vinegar. Or I experiment with bananas and other starch. So and we laugh about it.
Yeah, and I know, I like that we have the right community to laugh about those kind of dumb fermented jokes. But that's the amazing thing about what we have around us. You don't have to have the ripest tomatoes or the most beautiful apples, or you don't have to have the most gorgeous produce, though I urge people to do so. Vinegar, even though translated into French is vinaigre, like sour wine, doesn't have to be bad fruit or bad starch or bad sugar. It can be the most beautiful ingredient, and it can turn into the most beautiful vinegar. So I don't want to start off with thinking that vinegar is bad stuff, or bad stuff turned into good stuff. It can be really great stuff also made into really great stuff. But Jitti, on the other hand, has realized that there's a lot of parts that are wasted, that aren't quite living to their full potential. And he was more than generous enough to allow me to print his banana vinegar recipe in this book. In visiting Jitti, I had heard from thousands of people, like literally. I'm surprised. Who here actually knows Jitti? One? This is the weirdest thing, because when you go around the culinary community and it's like, oh, there's this guy Jitti, and oh yeah, I know him. Totally know him. Like, he knows more people. Now he knows all of you. Believe me. You can say you know Jitti. You have an in anywhere around this country. But in talking to him, I'm like, I've heard about you. I want to come visit you. I want to talk vinegar. I had never had someone welcome me into their home so graciously in the middle of chaos. And you walk into his house, and I don't know if it's still the same way. There's a little picture of it. But you don't know whether or not he's coming or going. It looks like everything's either being unpacked or packed. And everything is being fermented. Everything is being fermented.
I have 2 rooms.
Yeah.
Actually 3 rooms, including kitchen. So.
Yeah, it's wild. And it's not off-putting in the way, like you don't walk in there and smell fermentation. You smell this harmonious idea of like organisms living, things breathing, things culturing towards a wonderful and finite end. And what Jitti does is figure out what can I use that other people aren't using, what's being wasted, what isn't being forged, and how can I kind of integrate this into a kitchen's lexicon or a home cook's pantry. And with that, banana vinegar is one of the most ingenious things I've ever seen. I'll let you talk a little bit more about that, but just know, never throw out your banana peel again.
Well, I mean, when I teach fermentation, people come up to me, people get scared, because we're living in a modern world, everything is all fast-paced and we want everything convenient. So when now people dive back to thousands of years ago, from used to be eating so healthy, now, they get scared. So when I teach people, I always started with banana. Like, why do you eat banana? What color banana most people would eat? So it's just to challenge most people's perception. I mean, in this room, I would bet more than 70%. Most people would say that yellow banana probably tastes the best, right? But I mean, some would debate it. Some had grandma, banana muffin or banana bread, and they all, your grandma used all ripe banana. And some people would say, well, I eat banana, but I don't like when it's too mushy, the texture things. I was like, well, if you look back when you were a baby, we all eat mushy stuff or puree food. So when did we start to become like really picky, So when it comes to banana, I tell them that if your perception is actually oftentimes fool you. Banana Trade Commission would never advertise yellow banana. Never advertise black banana, because it looked ugly. But it actually, when banana is overripe, it becomes more antioxidant. And Peruvian people discovered that thousands of years ago, and they take the skin, boil it in the water, and drink it as medicine. Chop up the skin, put it in the stew as well. So because I do a lot of historic study, so I discovered that, well, if we're going to take some part of banana to make vinegar instead of using pulp and good part, what about I take banana skin? Because as a former farmer, I wanted to help. Basically, 7 years ago, I started traveling around the country. I turned down the job in a restaurant in New York, and that's when I discovered, how much it meant to your body to eat well. When I've never be living in an organic farm, eat organic vegetable off the ground and it's covered with dirt and versus to like supermarket stuff, and I felt great, So and I came across like some fermentation and food preservation over there too. So that's sort of like inspired me to do like learn more about fermentation and using different parts. But anyway, like coffee vinegar, for example, most restaurant or coffee shop, they brew coffee first time and then they throw them away. I took the second brews, I make brine to use them to ferment vegetable or making vinegar, and it actually had like really natural, good umami taste. But then you could take like a coffee grind and then grow mushroom. So that's my heritage vinegar project.
But you're not
Start.
you're not using solely Starbucks coffee.
No, no.
He's also amazing at repurposing bottles. Like, if you hear someone outside, scavenging for glass in your recycling container,
That's
it
me.
might turn into a vinegar someday.
Yeah. So I actually ask friends in restaurant when they have bottles, I say, hey, if not use it, you throw them away. I wanted to use them. So when I sell vinegar to the local chef, they'll get different size of bottle. And they were kind of frustrated. They were like, can we get like nice bottles so we could display? I said, that's the whole point. I want people to see, like, on the shelf, like, what do you do with beef feeder with the food? And they're like, oh, that's vinegar in there. So I mean, that's the heritage vinegar project start. But anyway.
Yeah, but you open up his freezer and there are banana skins. And now there are banana skins in my freezer as well. Because it's as simple as literally having those float in water, add a little sugar to, bringing it up to the right fermentation level. And I'm telling you, they taste like perfectly ripe bananas. And when you're tasting that vinegar, in your mind's eye, you're not having that mushy brown or black skinned banana in there. It's this beautiful kind of fresh and ripe flavor. And I think you can do that with vinegar for a lot of things. You have to get rid of the perception of what something looks like, because the corollary taste of a vinegar isn't necessarily that. There are a lot of parallels, not even parallels, right after wine, right after beer, even bread baking, there is a second fermentation, and that can be acidic. So the story of vinegar starts, maybe, 3,000 years ago in a documented fashion, but the story of vinegar is very parallel to that of any other alcoholic fermentation, be it beer, wine. And the reason I say bread too is because of kvass culture. So it's really hard to define, when vinegar was necessarily first made, possibly, in Egypt with the Fertile Crescent and all those beautiful figs and pomegranates going overripe, and they tried to make wine, or they did make wine, but they didn't know how to preserve wine, so then it turned into vinegar. And it was fascinating that, vinegar was a potable. It wasn't a culinary ingredient. We didn't use it to flavor things. It was, like Jitti was saying, it was a health and restorative drink for thousands of years. But contemporaneously, maybe the Zhou dynasty in China, they start kind of putting it as a dipping sauce for things like soup dumplings or noodles, etc. But, we know vinegar as a pantry item now. And it really wasn't a pantry item until more contemporary, and by that I mean like maybe Roman times. So we're kind of at this interesting cusp. Vinegar's been around, again, for thousands upon thousands of years, but I feel like only in the last 100 have we explored what vinegar can do to not only preserve other food, but flavor other food, and be part of like the larger cooking repertoire of what we have.
I mean, it's become a huge part of the diet now. I'm sure that several of you have heard of cider vinegar and what benefit. I mean, you eat apples at home. So what do you do with apple core? So you throw them away. Some people eat it, give it to dog. But you could save them. You could make your own vinegar now. So I'll give you a quick recipe.
Yeah.
So if you save all these apple core, put it in the water. Get black apple cider vinegar, because it's, again, when you buy any products in supermarket, read in the back of the label. Sometimes they misinterpret, or they try to fool you. Some would say unpasteurized. Some would say pasteurized, but then unfiltered. So you might want to get the one that said unpasteurized, so it have like live culture. Like if you taste vinegar today, a bunch of out of ferment, you will notice that in an hour or two you feel hungry. So that's what live food, live culture do to your body. So apple cider vinegar, every cup of water, put like about 3 teaspoons of sugar. Like use organic sugar, don't use corn syrup. But anything sweet, it actually could turn into vinegar as well. So, and then pour a little bit of black cider vinegar and weight all those apples down. So 10 weeks later, you get the raw apple cider vinegar.
Yeah, and it's so easy,
Super.
two biggest ingredients to making vinegar, other than having the right alcohol level if you're making that ferment first, or the right sugar level before that, is time and patience. I mean, really, it's like a non-interventionist fermentation. There are ways to make quicker vinegar. There are ways to use bubblers or big acetators, which are these things that are hermetically sealed and blow a whole bunch of air in there and regulate temperature. But I've never tasted vinegar better than that had a lot of time behind it and a lot of patience shown, because it's not hard to make. And the hardest things are to realize that there are a few variables. You have to steer it in the right direction. Sometimes it needs a little more sugar. Sometimes it needs a little more alcohol. Sometimes it needs a little more water. And just keeping it within these variables, be it bricks for sugar, or ABV for alcohol percentage, or testing the pH. It's just a matter of kind of like nudging it slowly. Somebody recently has told me the term helicopter mother. You know what that is? And I'm not talking about vinegar yet, but someone who's sitting there like, you got to do this, you got to do that. Well, the mother on vinegar is something that's an interesting indicator. It's telling you whether or not it's working, and how quickly it's working, and which way it's working. So it's a really wonderful thing to see. It's not 100% necessary to make vinegar, because we have so many wonderful indigenous yeast cultures living around us. But it's definitely a great indicator to tell you whether or not you're doing something correctly or not. The helicopter mother thing comes into play, because if that thing grows too thick and suffocates everything underneath, then it's going to die. So you don't necessarily need to have a giant mother in vinegar for it to be made. It can actually do bad things as well. So the preconception that you need a mother in vinegar, I think, has to be slightly examined. I think that myth has to be debunked a little, because it's not like in Egypt when they were drinking vinegar instead of wine. They're like, oh, well, I want to make a batch, give me some mother. I mean, there wasn't that realization until Louis Pasteur wrote a book in 1865 and understood that there was acetobacter, that there were these microbial things happening. So again, only in the last 150 years are we realizing how to harness the power of acetic acid.
Yeah. I mean, I discovered that for the past 6-7 years I've been making vinegar. Majority of organic fruits and vegetables had natural yeast. So if you don't rinse them with a chemical, you most likely could turn that into some sort of wine or vinegar. Like pine, for example, has a lot of yeast too. When you buy fruits, let's say grapes or apple, you see like a little bit of white stuff, white film. Those are basically yeast. There's a lab scientist, scientific lab out there that actually sent the yeast guy to collect all these fruit yeast and vegetable yeast sample, and they grow natural flavor for food for that. So.
Yeah, it's kind of amazing, again, non-interventionist and as natural and as beautiful and as kind of, pure a food as possible ends up turning into the best vinegar. Again, I want to debunk this idea that vinegar is sour wine or bad ingredients turn into great stuff. It can also be great stuff turned into great stuff. I kind of want to end about, there are a whole bunch of recipes in my book. I got to travel the world. I went to France, down to Orléans, which is about an hour south of Paris, where it was a fascinating place. All this wine would come from the Loire, down the river. And whatever wine didn't make it, this was pre-industrialization, would be dropped off on the shores because they didn't want to be taxed bringing it up to Paris. Well, hundreds and hundreds of years ago, having a whole bunch of sour wine, hence the word vinegar or vinaigre, people had to figure out what to do with it. In the same way that Jitti's trying to figure out what to do with apple cores and banana peels, that there were hundreds of vinegar makers in that town alone. Orléans style method, or the barrel age method, and we're not talking about balsamic barrels racking down, actually began in Orléans, France, out of necessity. I went to visit there because there's only one vinegar maker in that traditional style left. And talk about non-intervention, he does not have like an oenologist. He has a science laboratory that literally has cobwebs covering beakers. It's like, we don't need that. We know this works. We trust in this, and he's also one that told me, you don't need a mother, and that's not a malady to not have a mother. Like, it's been working, we trust it, and it keeps working. And again, vinegar's been around for thousands upon thousands of years and making itself. So we're just learning how to kind of live our parallel life with it. In Italy, I got to go to Modena and see balsamic vinegar being made, which is one that I think most of us first learn about. And everyone's like, oh, I got this great bottle of balsamic, it's so gourmet. Well, read my book and the 100 of other books about balsamic and see that is a very interesting market, and a lot of it out there is bullshit. And balsamic, to me, is less a vinegar than it is a method, because most other vinegars, like Jitti makes, are from ingredients that are not cooked or not altered, where balsamic's the must reduced down to a certain percentage, so it's already a syrup and then fermented. So it's a really interesting kind of like outlier, an extraneous vinegar, but yet probably the most ubiquitous around the world. In Austria, I went to Vienna and met this guy, Erwin Gegenbauer, and his name alone should intrigue you enough to read about him and taste his vinegars. But like Jitti, he makes hundreds of different types out of pure ingredients. Cucumber, only cucumber. Tomato, only tomato. There aren't additives, there aren't extra sugars necessarily put into his. And then Japan. I went to Japan thinking that there was going to be this culture of shokunin, these artisans that have been making vinegar for hundreds, if not thousands of years in the same way. Well, 99.9% of the country is the other way. It's industrially made. So I had to really search around Japan to find these vinegars, on top of the fact that in Japanese culture, vinegar isn't at the forefront of our palate. The flavors there are more about balance and umami, and vinegar is such a backbone, whereas here we're like, I want the sharpest, most bracing vinaigrette there is. So it's really interesting to travel the world and see how vinegar iterates throughout different cuisines. I mean, Jitti's Thai, and the reason I didn't go to Thailand is because I couldn't find much vinegar used there. There's so much amazing fresh citrus that is, vinegar is relegated as a necessity rather than a pantry essential.
We have shrubs. I mean, Thai people make shrub and they do drinks a lot, so because it's hot there,
Yeah.
So I guess they don't see a reason why to ferment and make vinegar. But actually we use quite a few vinegar. In Thai cooking, we use a lot of distilled vinegar, which I wouldn't recommend anyone to use them.
Nope.
Distilled vinegar is not real vinegar, so it almost had no health benefit to you whatsoever.
When they say like clean with vinegar, clean with white distilled. Get that out of your cooking pantry.
Yeah.
It blows my mind that when you're pickling, you get the most pristine produce, and you put the crappiest vinegar you can to preserve that. So get that out of there.
So I mean, basically, other thing that I would share, I'm sure that several you drink alcohol, like red wine, white wine, vinegars, and all that. A couple of years ago, I went to cook at a couple, an elderly couples, and I was horrified because I walked into the kitchen. They had wall-to-wall cookbook, double of the size of the cookbook that I had. Then I was looking through these pantry looking for tools. I stumbled upon these cabinet and opened it up. It looked like basically she had 3 different vinegar urns, and it's probably like 40 plus years old. You could see the drip mark, and I got goosebumps just to talk about it now. So I started grabbing my phone. I was like, leaning over, taking pictures, and I hear this camera clicking behind me with the flash, and I turn around. She's like, yeah, I Google you. You like vinegar? And she's like, you like that? And I was like, yeah, I do. And then I look on her counter. I see like 5 different bottles of vinegar. I was like, wow. She's like, taste them. So I taste these beer, red wine vinegar, white wine vinegar. It was so amazing. It tastes better than $100 bottles of wine vinegar that I tasted in a restaurant before. So I mean, basically, if you get leftover beer and wine, just put it in a container. 3 parts of alcohol. Don't use Bacardi 151 because it won't work. So it has to be low alcohol. So 3 parts of alcohol, 1 part of apple cider vinegar, like a live culture, So then leave that for 6-7 months. You should have really beautiful vinegar to use. So never throw it away. Your leftover beer and wine.
Yeah. And on that note, I want you to start tasting through the vinegars that you made, because these are the coffee vinegar, which he was explaining before, a cucumber vinegar as well.
Yep. And then I have pine vinegar. It basically comes from eastern white pine. So basically, white pine back then, when early settler came to United States, American Indian was the one that taught these folks about the benefits of having white pine because high vitamin C. So it's really interesting. So I'd like to sort of like have you taste.
Can you,
So what we want? Yeah,
can you talk a little about how you use these?
vinegar.
Like, I assume you're not drinking a bottle of vinegar, but whether you,
No.
maybe you are
Yeah,
sometimes
well,
with some of these, but like
when I'm
how-
making and
ways
tasting,
of
I am,
using
but
them in your cooking.
I am not one to take a shot of apple cider vinegar in the morning. You know, and I think a lot of people expect me to be like, oh yeah, I drink it all the time. I'll taste them, but it's just not for me. What is for me is realizing that, you know, make the most simple vinaigrette and then make that same ratio or vinaigrette with red wine, with white wine vinegar, with rice vinegar. I mean, you'll see that there's such a gamut of difference. So it's just a matter of figuring out what flavor profile you want to use. Deglaze a steak with the coffee vinegar is like red eye gravy. You know, like
Yeah.
there's so many interesting things that can come out of all these flavors. It's just, you know, it's like having a whole new spice cabinet off of, you know, a single technique that you already know. You know how to implement vinegar into different recipes. Try different vinegars in those recipes.
Michael and I discussed earlier when we walk around. He said, well, you know, I mean, we both agree one thing, that since we have been drinking this raw vinegar, we don't have issue with arthritis, you know, like joint pains and all that. I used to play rugby for 16 years, so it's really hard for me to get out of bed every morning to go to work or standing on my feet working as a chef for 14, 16 hours a day. So to drink raw vinegar straight up, it's too strong for me. You know, usually I mix with warm water, or I put in a little soda. You know, so I try to have like a little bit of raw vinegar in my diet every day. So either making salad dressings and all that. But yes,
Does the banana vinegar have the same benefits as like apple cider vinegar or the other one?
I think it does. I mean, basically, you have the same culture. But I mean, oftentimes when you ferment something, the food, you know, was turn it into, it gives other type of benefit. So the culture matter in vinegar has a lot of benefit with that. So, I mean, I'm not a big drinker of coffee vinegar because, you know, I don't really drink coffee anymore, even though that it's light. But I pretty much taste all this vinegar every day, you know, when I make them. So I don't have a problem with it, you know. I lose weight, a lot of weight too. So somehow, 2 weeks ago I was so fatty.
I'm on the other side. We try to keep balance.
For the pine vinegar, what part are you using to make
I use a needle.
the needle?
Yep. So the pine needle, when you pick them, you could Google Eastern white pine. Not every pine are edible. You know, up in Northeast you see spruce, Douglas fir. I make vinegar with all that. So you wanted to pick needles kind of close to the trunk, the tree trunk, because it has a lot more vitamin C. So, but then depending on the season too, I like to pick them in early spring, you know, before they start making these cone. I think that it's, you know, because through winter time, you know, I discovered that the flavor is condensed. I even take pine cone from the Eastern white pine when it has sap, and I make vinegar, but I didn't bring it today. So.
Were you saying that as the vinegar is being processed or whatever, you can make adjustments to it? You taste it and.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, you know, and it's taken me some time to get to the point where I can feel like I can steer it in the right way. I mean, you know when a vinegar is going wrong.
What would be the soonest you would try to taste it to see what it needed to, how it needed to be?
So I literally only use 3 tools, aside from whatever vessel I'm fermenting in. I use a hydrometer, which, you know, checks for ABV, and also checks for brick. So like I can figure out how much sugar is in the solution or how much alcohol, and I know what range I want it in before I start fermenting in the vinegar. I call it the champagne range because I found it to work out best like between 19 and 23 bricks and like 9 to 10 to 14% alcohol. That's why wine vinegar turns so easily, it's already in that range. Whereas beer vinegar, if you just let it out and ferment, it needs a little coaxing sometimes. Darker beers are better than lighter because they have more high saccharides, and those malts are already towards a caramelization point where the sugars convert a little bit easier. And unhopped too. Oddly, I've been trying to make like tons of hop vinegars. Hops are a preservative in it of itself, so they actually impede that second fermentation. So unhopped beer vinegars work. But yeah, I try to just keep them within this window, and it's a pretty big window. 19 to 23 bricks and 10 to 14% ABV. And it's just a matter of adding a little more sugar adds a little more alcohol if you're in that state, adds a little more acidity. So you can start kind of figuring out what expression of vinegar or acidity you want. The other thing I use are pH strips, little litmus tests just to see if they're below 3.4 and above 2.8. And when they're not, then you got to figure something out because they can go base really quickly.
And I have one more question. Other than tasting bad, is there any, can they be bad for you? Can something go wrong and that they're actually bad for you to use?
When you ferment anything, in general, like general rules, you always sanitize your tool. There's a possibly cross contamination. So, but I mean, like when I ferment anything, let's say if I had like a little bit cookie jar, a small cookie jar, I rinse with water, and then put it in the microwave for 3 minutes, and then my jar is super hot, or I boil hot water, So, and then other tools that you use when you taste them, you can't taste vinegar and then from your mouth and go back there, because you're working with culture, and also your environment too. So if you ferment, that's why when Michael come to my house, I have one room just for vinegar and kombucha, because I discovered that kombucha and vinegar is actually almost the same matter. They give SCOBY, but I also, because before I used to ferment some stuff in the same room, I had Japanese umebushi, which is a fermented plum, but it has a SCOBY grow in there, which is interesting.
Yeah, that's interesting.
So it's basically the cultures jump from another. I do a lot of different type of cross fermentation too. Like when I do sourdough, I use fermented liquid from dailies, from fermented vegetables, and I even use fruits, all that too. So you might want to keep them all separately.
Yeah, I feel like
Ideally.
that's through the process though. Having now traveled around the world and seen a lot of different vinegar cultures, I don't mean like actual culture, vinegar cuisines grow.
Mm-hmm.
In Piedmont, my wife's a wine writer, and so we did a little wine stuff, we did a little vinegar stuff, it was kind of nice. But in Piedmont, all these Barolo makers were like, oh, it's illegal to even make vinegar in the same space because of the cross-contamination. So, that made me feel like, oh, then obviously you should separate them, bad things can happen, but I've never found anything bad to happen. Once a vinegar is a vinegar, totally fine. It's a preservative. It's a caustic environment too.
Yeah.
Vinegar is defined as 4 to 6% acetic acid in water. Once you go above that, it starts we can only have that in the States. Outside of that, it starts becoming a little more caustic. You can find 24% Attica vinegar in like Scandinavia, and they use that to actually wash lutka fish. So talk about vinegars that are relegated to cleaning. Anything over 6% is gets a little intense. So, but once it's at that vinegar state, aside from these things called vinegar eels, nematoids, which are kind of like what were
Almost
those
like
things?
a worm.
Yeah, you can get them in the mail. Sea monkeys. They literally, you can put a light up to the glass and they all drift towards it. You can even strain those out, and it's a little protein anyway. Really, nothing bad. Like I've never seen anything go wrong.
A lot of people get confused between vinegar eel, I call it vinegar worm. So with what's it called, fruit fly.
Yeah.
If you see a little white particle look like a tiny grain of rice stick around your jaws, that's a fruit fly egg. So vinegar eel, they don't grow like that. Mostly you will see, if you see your SCOBY float on top, sometimes you will see vinegar eel. When you put lights on, you see it wavy, look like live culture. So actually it's fine to eat it too.
Mm-hmm.
SCOBY, you could eat them as well. You could cut them up and add into your, when you make, let's say you were talking about how you use them. When you ferment vinegar apple cider, let's say if you use a good parts of apple, you could take SCOBY and blend them into your salad dressing too. Or
It's cool. It's like a thickener. It's a
yeah,
texture modifier.
Exactly. Your smoothie as well.
Yeah.
I made it for my goddaughter all the time. I call it yaki juice. With kales and fruits and other things.
Yeah.
So
In
it's
the-
actually good for you.
In the Philippines, they actually take the mother out of coconut vinegar, pata de coco, and hang it to dry, and then almost eat it like a jerky.
Yeah.
Because it's kind of amazing. Have you ever had jerky with acidity? It makes you salivate, but it also kind of satiates you at the same time. So I kind of use that idea in my book and made a Dijon beef jerky because I wanted something, a tougher cut broken down by vinegar, but also something that you can sit there and chew on for a while and has that acidity rather than just like all that salt. So yeah, pata de coco is kind of an amazing thing as well. But we want to have you all come up and start tasting vinegars, and you can interact with us during. But thank you all. Today's actually my birthday, so I also wanted to say thank you for inviting me. Yeah. I couldn't ask for a better place to do this.